Sarah Morgan pushed open the heavy glass door of her small townhouse and stepped onto the quiet sidewalk. Dawn's soft light cast delicate shadows across the rows of modest homes lining the street. The air was crisp, with the gentle promise of a warm day to come, a day that could have been just like any other, filled with a bustling routine, cups of coffee, and small talk at the office. And yet, something in Sarah's heart thrilled with excitement she hadn't felt in ages. She paused to shift the strap of her black leather handbag, which contained her neatly arranged documents, a tablet, and a few swatches of fabric, a testament to the fashion world she thrived in. Taking a deep breath, she savored the mixture of possibilities swirling in the cool air. She had news to share, news that felt wondrous and terrifying all at once. For 6 years, Sarah had devoted herself to the company, a well-known high-end fashion brand that prided itself on leading-edge design, impeccable craftsmanship, and an aura of exclusivity. It was a place many design graduates dreamed of working at, and yet it was also a place where cutthroat competition and relentless drive were prerequisites for survival. Sarah reflected on her journey as she made her way down the street to the bus stop, age and early drive. In her late 20s, she had applied for an entry-level position in the marketing department. It was a role that combined her love of fashion with her skill for communication. She knew the industry well, having grown up devouring every magazine and runway article she could afford, teaching herself to sew in her teenage bedroom. Steady ascent, over the years, Sarah's knack for understanding what made garments stand out and her ability to handle the stress of corporate demands led her to steady promotions. From assisting in photo shoots to organizing small but high-stakes runway events, she proved herself. Eventually, she was appointed assistant manager, a position that kept her close to both the business side and the creative departments. Company culture, the corporate culture, while exciting, was also ruthless. Sarah had seen coworkers humiliated for minor mistakes, interns working themselves to exhaustion, and departmental heads clinging to their jobs like lifeboats in stormy seas. In this environment, Sarah carved a reputation for being both diligent and respectful. She tried to keep her own moral compass steady, even when others around her compromised theirs for the sake of personal gain or upper management's favor. That morning, Sarah believed her life was finally coming together. Just a few days earlier, she had discovered she was pregnant. It was unplanned, to be sure. She was a single woman, and her relationship status was complicated, largely by her own devotion to her career, but she felt an incandescent joy about the idea of becoming a mother. She had spent the weekend reevaluating her life, thinking about how she'd balance her demanding job with a child's needs. But despite the worry and uncertainty, she was determined to make it work. She had faith in her boss, Mr. Donovan. She believed that a man with such an eye for detail and such drive for excellence in his creations would understand the value of dedication and loyalty from an employee who had given everything to this brand. It never crossed her mind that the company might see her pregnancy as a liability. She had so many ideas for expanding the brand's reach. She was even scheduled to meet with a major potential investor that very afternoon. The investor, who had admired her diligence, was open to hearing an extended pitch. Sarah planned to lead part of the presentation and felt excited to prove her worth. The bus arrived, tires crunching against the curb, and Sarah climbed aboard. She greeted the familiar driver with a polite nod, took her usual seat near the front, and glanced out the window. The city scenery slipped by in a comfortable blur of tall buildings, vibrant cafes, and early commuters. In her mind, she rehearsed how she would share her pregnancy news with Mr. Donovan. She wasn't demanding special treatment. She simply wanted the company to know that, in a few months, she might need to adjust her schedule slightly or shift into a less physically demanding role during the final stages of pregnancy. But she was willing to put in as much effort as it took to keep everything running smoothly. She had proven herself time and again, working late hours, stepping in for absent teammates, and even designing on-trend window displays when the marketing team was short-handed. As she disembarked from the bus, Sarah walked the final few blocks to the towering structure of steel and glass that housed the headquarters of one of the city's most prestigious fashion brands. Her heart fluttered with hope, confidence, and a hint of nervousness for the conversation ahead. Chapter 2, Memories and Early Dreams. Before stepping into the building, Sarah allowed herself a moment to recall how it all began for her, this love affair with fashion and design that had propelled her into the intensity of the corporate world. Childhood inspirations. Growing up in a small town, Sarah didn't have much. Her mother was a nurse who worked night shifts at the local hospital, and her father had left when she was very young. Money was scarce, so instead of purchasing brand new clothes, Sarah frequently visited thrift shops with her mother. That's where she learned to value the subtle artistry behind garments, the tiny stitches on a vintage coat, the carefully embroidered pattern on an old blouse. Sarah would pick out pieces that caught her eye, then try to alter them at home. She'd cut off the sleeves, add bits of lace, or repurpose them entirely into new items. By the time she was 12, she developed a talent for creative repurposing. By 16, she was making her own dresses from scratch. Self-teaching and ambition, she dreamed of attending a prestigious fashion institute, but finances were a concern. She decided to study marketing in college, figuring it would give her a broader skill set. Yet she never let go of her creative pursuits, taking evening classes in fashion illustration and textile science whenever she could. She participated in local fashion shows, designing small collections for free. It was at one of these local shows where she was noticed by a representative of the brand she would eventually dedicate 6 years of her life to. The representative was impressed by her ability to handle a million tasks at once: designing, styling, marketing, even hosting. The offer came in the form of an internship, and she jumped at the chance. A rise through the ranks, the internship led to a permanent role in marketing, and from there, Sarah's work ethic caught the eye of various department heads. The company discovered that she was adaptable, creative, and most importantly, unafraid of hard work. In an industry filled with individuals who often focused on just one aspect of fashion, Sarah's multifaceted skills made her indispensable. Over the next few years, she received promotions that brought better pay and greater responsibilities. She also learned something about herself. She was good at supporting others. Whether it was an emerging designer who needed help refining a presentation or a frazzled new assistant who required guidance, Sarah was there to lend a hand. It was a trait that garnered her a quiet respect within the company. Chapter 3. Stepping into the lion's den. Having taken a moment to compose herself outside the building, Sarah finally walked through the grand revolving doors. The lobby was a testament to the company's reputation: gleaming marble floors, vaulted ceilings, and displays of iconic couture pieces from seasons past showcased in glass cases. The entire space exuded a sense of sophistication and exclusivity. Sarah made her way to the elevator bank, greeting the front desk receptionist, Helena, who returned her hello with a warm smile. Up on the 25th floor, where the marketing, design, and management teams were housed, the atmosphere buzzed with energy. Designers rushed from workstation to workstation, carrying sketches or swatches of fabric. Phones rang incessantly. Clients and collaborators were greeted in the sleek reception area with impeccably arranged flowers on modern glass tables. Sarah's workstation, her own office space, was modest compared to some of the showy offices reserved for top executives. Still, it afforded her a decent view of the city skyline and enough room to display her personal inspirations: a mood board decorated with postcards of runway shows, color palettes that appealed to her, and photos of fashion icons who had shaped her sense of style. She placed her bag on her desk, powered up her computer, and was about to check her schedule when a young intern named Lucy approached. Lucy, breathlessly: "Sarah, good morning. Mr. Donovan asked to see you in his office as soon as you came in." A flutter of nerves flickered inside Sarah. This was perfect timing, she thought. She intended to let him know about her pregnancy that very morning. She hoped she could deliver the news in a calm, professional manner before the day's busyness consumed them. Sarah, with a calm smile: "Thanks, Lucy. I'll head there right away." Lucy dashed off, perhaps to find her next assignment, while Sarah took a steadying breath. The moment had arrived. Chapter 4. The bombshell in Donovan's office. Anticipation of support. Mr. Donovan's office was a corner suite with glass walls that overlooked the city. It reflected the man: slick, modern, and undeniably impressive. He was known for his discerning eye and no-nonsense attitude. Many whispered that he'd effectively saved the brand from a downward spiral just 5 years ago with a series of bold marketing moves and design collaborations that breathed new life into the collections. He was also rumored to be cold, calculating, and some said heartless when it came to dealing with subordinates. Sarah, however, had always had a respectful, if somewhat distant, relationship with him. He valued her contributions, or so she believed, often praising her for her ability to juggle tasks and her willingness to go the extra mile. She held on to a genuine optimism that he would support her news. She knocked on the door, and a muffled "come in" drifted through. Initial conversation. Entering the office, she saw Mr. Donovan seated at his large desk, reviewing a file of sketches. She noticed he wore an impeccable suit as usual and had that clipped, efficient air about him. He glanced up when she walked in, but he didn't smile. "Mr. Donovan." "Morning, Sarah." Sarah, gently: "Good morning, Mr. Donovan. Lucy said you wanted to speak with me." Mr. Donovan: "Yes, I did. Have a seat." She obliged, quietly setting her handbag by the side of the chair. She tried to read his expression. He seemed tense, perhaps irritated. Could it be about the big investor meeting later that day? "Mr. Donovan, we need to go over the details of the pitch presentation. We're meeting them at 3:00 p.m. in the conference room, and I want to ensure everything is flawless." Sarah: "Of course. I've gone over the pitch deck. I'll handle the portion about the brand's social media reach and our new target demographics." She paused, reminding herself that she wanted to tell him about the pregnancy. She tried to ease into the topic. "Sarah, Mr. Donovan, before we delve into all the details, there's something personal I wanted to share with you. It's good news, at least for me, but it might mean I have to make a few adjustments at work eventually." He raised an eyebrow but said nothing, so Sarah pressed on. "Sarah, I'm pregnant. I found out last week. I just thought you should know early on so we can plan ahead for any coverage we might need in the later months. I fully intend to keep up with my responsibilities as best I can." She offered a small, hopeful smile. She didn't expect a gushing congratulations, but she certainly didn't expect what came next. The shocked Mr. Donovan's expression hardened. If he felt any sort of shock, it was overshadowed by immediate displeasure. "Mr. Donovan, pregnant, Sarah." "Yes, sir, about 2 months along." He cut her off mid-sentence. "Mr. Donovan, Sarah, you know how demanding our work is. We're entering our busiest season and we have major investors interested. You're telling me you're pregnant now?" She stared at him, her heart sinking a little. He spoke as though she had personally offended him. "Sarah, carefully, I understand the timing might not be ideal, but I'm confident I can still manage my workload, at least for several months. After that, I might need a short maternity leave, which is standard." "Mr. Donovan." "Standard? Sarah, let me be frank. We don't have the time nor the resources to accommodate someone who's going to become a liability." That word landed like a sharp slap across Sarah's face. Liability. Her optimism faltered. Sarah, maintaining composure. "I've been here for 6 years. I've given countless hours and helped whenever and wherever needed. I'm simply asking for reasonable accommodation." Mr. Donovan let out a humorless laugh, pushing aside the file of sketches he had been reviewing. "Mr. Donovan, this is a high-end fashion brand, Sarah, not a daycare. The board won't be thrilled to learn that my assistant manager might be out of commission. We need people who are fully present, physically and mentally." Her cheeks grew warm with a mixture of anger and humiliation. She forced herself to keep her voice level. "Sarah, sir, with all due respect, pregnancy doesn't mean I'm suddenly useless. I can still." "Mr. Donovan." "Sarah, do you know what goes into planning a runway, or securing investor funds, or managing last-minute crises in production and PR? This place can't slow down. And pregnant women have doctor's appointments, health risks, plus you'll want time off after the birth. That's a massive inconvenience. I'm sorry, but I can't have a liability right now." She opened her mouth to respond, but he continued, his tone turning steely. "Mr. Donovan, you're fired. Consider this your last day." It was as if the floor had vanished from beneath her. One moment, she was simply sharing personal news she had every right to be proud of. The next, the job she had poured her life into was stripped away in an instant. She thought of all the late nights, the weekends sacrificed, the loyalty she had demonstrated. None of it seemed to matter. Sarah, voice trembling. "Fired. You're actually firing me because I'm pregnant." Mr. Donovan, with a dismissive wave. "Look, call it whatever you want. We have policies that require employees to be able to meet the demands of the job. You can go to HR, but trust me, this is the final decision." He pressed a button on his phone's intercom. "Mr. Donovan, Lucy, please come to my office." Lucy arrived, looking nervous. Mr. Donovan instructed her to help Sarah pack her belongings immediately. Sarah could barely process what was happening. Her mind spun. Questions, indignation, and heartbreak all collided, leaving her reeling. Sarah, barely above a whisper. "This is illegal. I have rights." He simply shrugged. "Mr. Donovan, the company's legal team can handle any nuisance claims. Please collect your things and exit the premises." Chapter 5. The Depths of Betrayal. Lucy followed Sarah out of Mr. Donovan's office, an apologetic expression on her face. They entered Sarah's office, and Lucy quietly grabbed a couple of empty boxes. The day was just starting, and yet Sarah's world felt like it had stopped. The hum of busy employees in the background was surreal, like static in a nightmare. Lucy, softly. "Sarah, I don't know what to say. This is awful. Sarah, I can't believe he fired me for being pregnant. I thought he'd be more understanding." She began placing personal items in a box, pictures she'd pinned to a board, notebooks filled with sketches and ideas, a trophy-like plaque the company had given her 2 years ago for employee excellence. The irony stung her as she placed that plaque into the box. Tears threatened to spill from her eyes, but Sarah fought them back. She needed to stay strong, if not for herself, then for the life growing inside her. Outside her office, she could sense the curious eyes of coworkers, some of whom looked sympathetic, while others simply tried to ignore the situation. She wanted to shout the injustice at the top of her lungs, but at the same time, she felt a crushing sense of shame and vulnerability. It felt as though she were being kicked out, as though she had done something wrong by daring to want both a career and a child. Once the boxes were filled, Lucy helped carry them down to the lobby. The entire elevator ride was silent, save for Lucy's hushed words of consolation. "Lucy, if you need anything, let me know. This is just really unfair." Sarah could only nod. She was too upset to do more than whisper a thank you. Once they reached the lobby, Sarah paused by the front doors. Helena, the receptionist, looked on in concern. "Helena, what's going on? Are you leaving?" Sarah, voice trembling, apparently for good. Helena's eyes widened, her outrage evident. "Helena, that can't be right. You've done so much here." Sarah pressed her lips together, gave a sad shrug, then walked through the revolving doors, the weight of her boxes matching the weight of disappointment in her chest. Chapter 6, Despair and Determination. The taxi ride to nowhere. She set the boxes on the sidewalk and hailed a taxi. Her mind spun with questions. What now? She had rent to pay, doctor's appointments to schedule, and not a single plan for such a sudden loss of income. She felt the baby was a blessing, but how was she supposed to handle this alone? As the taxi pulled away from the curb, Sarah allowed herself to cry softly in the back seat. The driver glanced at her in the rearview mirror with a mix of concern and discomfort, but said nothing. She didn't want to go home just yet. Her place felt too small, too silent. She didn't want to return there with a sense of defeat clinging to her. Suddenly, she remembered the meeting with the investor, scheduled for 3:00 p.m. that day. She had been a key part of the pitch. She wondered if Mr. Donovan was going to scramble to fill her spot or if he'd cancel. A spark of anger ignited in her chest. She had worked tirelessly to prepare for that meeting, and now he was simply discarding her. She thought of the investor, an older gentleman named Leonard Griffith. They had spoken briefly at a gala a month ago. He had been intrigued by Sarah's insights into upcoming fashion trends and her marketing savvy. It was at his request that she had been invited to the official pitch meeting. Perhaps. She was jolted out of her thoughts as the taxi driver asked where she wanted to be dropped off. On a whim, she gave him the address of a nearby coffee shop where she sometimes worked on weekends. She figured she could sit there, gather her thoughts, and figure out a plan. A quiet corner and a cup of coffee at the coffee shop. Sarah settled into a corner table, letting the boxes rest at her feet. She took out her phone, ignoring the curious glances from other patrons. With shaky fingers, she dialed a number she never thought she'd have to call, a local lawyer who specialized in employment discrimination. She had grabbed his business card at a women's rights expo a few months back. The lawyer's assistant answered, and Sarah left a message detailing that she had been fired for being pregnant and needed a consultation. The assistant promised a call back later in the day. Next, Sarah opened her email on her phone and saw the flurry of messages from coworkers, some expressing shock and dismay, others simply wanting to confirm if the rumors were true. She skimmed past them. She felt too raw to craft replies. Then an unexpected email caught her eye. Meeting confirmation with Mr. Leonard Griffith, 3:00 p.m. She had forgotten she was on the email chain. The message was from Mr. Donovan's executive assistant, confirming the meeting was still on, but had reassigned certain parts of the pitch to other managers. Anger and sadness warred within her once again. Not only had they dismissed her, but they were clearly moving on as if she had never existed. That's when a sudden idea took shape in her mind. She recalled how Leonard Griffith had asked for her opinions specifically. He valued her insights. What if she reached out to him directly? Would he be sympathetic to her situation, or would he back the company? She wasn't certain, but something in her gut told her she should try. She sipped her coffee, mustering the courage to compose a brief email to Mr. Griffith. Subject: a confidential matter, requesting a brief conversation. Dear Mr. Griffith, I hope this email finds you well. You may recall our discussions last month regarding the company's upcoming ventures and the unique strategies we spoke about. I am reaching out under unexpected circumstances, as I have recently parted ways with the company. If you have a few moments to spare, I would greatly appreciate the opportunity to speak with you about a critical matter. My phone number is included below, and I am available at your earliest convenience. Thank you for your time and understanding. Sincerely, Sarah Morgan. She read over the email, wondering if it was too vague or if it struck the right tone of urgency. In the end, she decided it was best not to divulge too much detail in an email. She hit send, placed her phone on the table, and stared out the window, unsure of what the future would hold. The inner resolve sitting there in the coffee shop, Sarah felt waves of despair and anger, but beneath them, a small flame of determination burned. She had survived challenges before: lack of money for tuition, the daunting competition of the fashion industry, the daily grind that tried to stifle creativity. She wasn't about to let this heartbreak define her. Deep down, she knew that firing a woman for being pregnant wasn't just illegal, it was ethically and morally wrong. She thought about the baby growing inside her, a life that would soon rely on her strength and ability to fight back. No matter how bleak her current circumstances seemed, she made a silent promise to stand up for herself and for her child. Sarah to herself, I won't let him get away with this. Chapter 7, a flicker of hope. As the sun climbed higher, the coffee shop began to fill with people looking for their mid-morning caffeine fix. Sarah checked her phone, half expecting to see an immediate reply from Leonard Griffith, though she knew that was unrealistic. High-profile investors typically ran busy schedules. She pulled out her planner, flipping through pages detailing upcoming projects she had hoped to manage at the company. Each note felt like a reminder of what she had lost. Yet at the same time, it served as a testament to her abilities and the knowledge she possessed. A chance call around noon, her phone buzzed. The caller ID displayed a number she didn't recognize. With her heart pounding, she answered. Sarah, hello, Sarah Morgan speaking. Voice on the other end. Hello, Ms. Morgan. This is Anna, Mr. Griffith's personal assistant. He received your email and would like to speak with you. Are you available to meet later today? Sarah's eyes widened. She felt a rush of relief mingled with nerves. Sarah, yes, absolutely. What time works for him? Anna, he's available around 6:00 p.m. Would you be able to come to his office? Sarah, yes, of course. Please let me know the address and I'll be there. Anna provided the details and Sarah jotted them down in her planner. She hung up, her heart still racing. She wondered what exactly she was going to say to him. She couldn't just burst into tears about how she'd been fired, though the injustice of it nearly strangled her every time she thought about it. She needed a plan, a clear set of facts. Planning her approach, she opened her notes app and began to outline her background, 6 years at the company, roles, promotions, achievements. The firing, the precise sequence of events, how Mr. Donovan had explicitly cited pregnancy as the reason, any potential documentation or witnesses. What she wanted, did she want to sue the company? Did she want him to withdraw his investment? Or was she merely hopping for guidance and connections? The more she typed, the clearer her thoughts became. If she could convey to Mr. Griffith the gravity of the situation, maybe he'd see how the company's practices could tarnish his investment. Moreover, if he had any sense of moral responsibility, he might be willing to help her. As she sipped a refill of her now lukewarm coffee, Sarah felt the first real spark of hope since the day began. Chapter 8, a meeting with an investor arriving at Griffith's office. Leonard Griffith's office was situated in a sleek skyscraper in the heart of the city's financial district. The lobby was grand, though not in a flashy way. Rather, it exuded a quiet luxury that spoke to old money and stable investments. Sarah approached the front desk, where a smartly dressed receptionist confirmed her identity and guided her to the elevator. On the 38th floor, she was met by Anna, the same assistant she'd spoken to on the phone. Anna was a poised woman in her early 40s, wearing a tailored navy suit. She offered Sarah a polite, professional smile. Anna, Mr. Griffith will see you in a moment. Can I get you anything, water, coffee? Sarah, smiling back. Water, please, thank you. Anna led Sarah to a cozy waiting area with plush chairs and a view of the sprawling city below. As Sarah waited, she couldn't help but feel dwarfed by the grandeur of the place. This was a different realm than the frenetic creativity of a fashion house. Here, everything spoke of large-scale finance, of big decisions that shaped entire industries. Anna returned shortly with a glass of water, and within minutes, the double doors to Leonard Griffith's personal office swung open. Anna, Mr. Griffith will see you now. Sarah stood, smoothed her skirt, and entered the office. Investor's demeanor. Leonard Griffith was an older man, perhaps in his 60s, with silver hair impeccably groomed. His suit, while obviously expensive, had a timeless cut. He seemed like someone who favored classic elegance over passing trends. He stood to greet Sarah, extending a hand. Mr. Griffith, Ms. Morgan, it's good to see you. I was quite surprised to learn you've parted ways with the company, especially right before the meeting I had scheduled with them this afternoon. Please sit down. They settled into chairs by a small round table rather than at his massive desk, giving the meeting a more personal feel. Sarah, thank you for agreeing to see me, Mr. Griffith. I appreciate your time. Mr. Griffith, smiling politely. Of course, we had a very productive conversation a month ago, and I was looking forward to your input at the pitch today, so I must say I was puzzled to hear from you separately. Sarah swallowed, choosing her words carefully. Sarah, I was fired this morning. Rather abruptly, in fact. He arched his eyebrows, leaning forward slightly. Mr. Griffith, fired. It's quite rare for someone in your position to be let go so suddenly, especially on the day of a major investor meeting. May I ask why? Sarah inhaled, her throat tight, but she forced herself to speak in a clear tone. Sarah, because I informed my boss, Mr. Donovan, that I'm pregnant. A flicker of shock crossed Mr. Griffith's features, followed by a slow frown. Mr. Griffith, are you certain that was the reason? Sarah, I'm absolutely certain. He stated it plainly. He said pregnant women are a liability and that the company needed someone stronger. A heavy silence fell between them. Mr. Griffith steepled his fingers, looking thoughtful and disturbed. Mr. Griffith, Ms. Morgan, I must admit this is troubling news. I don't condone such practices, and I'm surprised the company would be so blatant about it. Sarah, I have no reason to lie, Mr. Griffith. I gave them 6 years of my life, consistently exceeding expectations. I was a major contributor to the pitch you heard about. This was not due to underperformance, it was purely about my pregnancy. Mr. Griffith, I believe you. You've always struck me as honest and dedicated. Now the question is, what are you hopping for? Are you seeking legal recourse, or do you have something else in mind? Sarah paused, carefully forming her response. Sarah, I'll be honest, I'm still reeling from the shock, but I reached out because I know you value ethical business practices and genuine talent. If you proceed with investing in them, I think you should know about their treatment of employees, specifically female employees. This could reflect poorly on the brand and on your investment, not to mention the legal troubles it might invite if they make this a pattern. Mr. Griffith nodded, his gaze thoughtful. Mr. Griffith, I appreciate your candor. While I do have to conduct my due diligence, I'm inclined to believe that where there's smoke, there's fire. Unlawful termination over a pregnancy is a serious matter. Sarah felt a wave of relief. Regardless of the outcome, at least someone was listening, someone with influence. Mr. Griffith, let me think about the best way to approach this. The meeting this afternoon will proceed, but I may reveal I have certain reservations. I won't mention your visit unless it becomes absolutely necessary. Meanwhile, I'd encourage you to speak with a lawyer if you haven't already. You do have grounds for a potential lawsuit. Sarah nodding. Thank you, Mr. Griffith. I've already reached out to someone. I'm determined not to let this go unchallenged. They spoke a bit more, and then Mr. Griffith stood, offering his hand again. Mr. Griffith, good luck, Ms. Morgan. I have a feeling that you'll land on your feet, people like you always do. Sarah left his office with her heart feeling lighter than it had all day. Maybe she was still jobless, but she had found an ally in a powerful place, and that felt like the first real victory since her world had turned upside down that morning. Chapter 9, lawyer up. The initial legal consultation the next day, Sarah found herself in a modest office in a nondescript building far from the glossy towers of the city center. She was meeting with Eric Gonzalez, an employment lawyer specializing in discrimination cases. He was a short, balding man in his 50s with a warm smile that put her at ease. Eric, gesturing to a chair. Please sit, Ms. Morgan. Would you like anything to drink? Sarah, I'm fine, thank you. He nodded and took a seat behind his desk, sliding a legal pad in front of him. Eric, so from your voicemail, I gather you were terminated immediately after revealing your pregnancy to your employer. Sarah, yes, that's correct. She recounted the entire conversation with Mr. Donovan, the words he used, the abruptness of the decision, how it all happened within minutes of her disclosure. Eric listened intently, occasionally jotting down notes. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen against the desk. Eric, this is a clear-cut case of pregnancy discrimination, at least from what you're telling me. Have you spoken to human resources? Sarah, sighing, not yet. The company practically escorted me out, and Mr. Donovan said HR would back his decision, but I do plan to contact them. Eric, keep it brief if you do. The next steps depend on whether we want to try internal resolution or move straight to filing a complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, EEOC. In such a blatant case, it's likely they'll want to settle quickly to avoid a lawsuit, but it's still early and we need to gather evidence. Sarah, what kind of evidence? Eric, emails, messages, any record of the conversation, though that might be tricky if it was verbal. Witnesses, if any. That intern Lucy, for instance, who saw you packing up, or your coworkers who are aware that Mr. Donovan fired you immediately after your announcement. The more we can show a direct link between your pregnancy disclosure and the termination, the stronger our case. Sarah nodded, feeling both anxious and somewhat empowered. She hated the idea of a legal battle, but she also hated the thought of letting Mr. Donovan's actions stand unchallenged. Eric, also, how has your financial situation changed since yesterday? Sarah, voice tight. I have some savings, but I was relying on my salary to cover rent, expenses, and now medical bills. I'll have to figure something out. Eric, we can request lost wages and possibly additional damages if the court or a settlement determines that the termination was indeed wrongful. But these things take time. Sarah stared down at her clasped hands, fighting a fresh wave of anxiety for the future. Sarah, I understand. I'm ready to do whatever it takes. Eric nodded sympathetically, then handed her a folder with documents to review and sign if she decided to formally hire him. Eric, take your time with this. If we move forward, I'll represent you. My fee structure is detailed inside. I usually work on a contingency basis in discrimination cases, meaning I don't get paid unless we reach a settlement or win in court. Sarah, thank you. I appreciate you explaining everything. She left his office with a mix of apprehension and determination swirling in her chest. There was a possibility that the company would retaliate, that this could get messy, but she also knew she had to stand her ground. For her own dignity, and for the child growing within her, she couldn't let fear dictate her actions. Chapter 10, The Company in Crisis. Mr. Donovan's investor meeting fallout. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Mr. Donovan walked into the 3:00 p.m. meeting with Leonard Griffith, the previous day confident he could secure the funds needed to expand the brand's global reach. He and his team had meticulously prepared a pitch deck that showcased the brand's recent successes, innovative designs, and projections for profit margins if they received the capital infusion. Yet he couldn't shake a nagging feeling that something was off. Sarah had been a key figure in preparing all of the marketing data. She was, in many ways, the linchpin for presenting the brand's demographic research, social media metrics, and consumer engagement strategy. Instead, these slides were now assigned to two other managers less versed in the nitty-gritty details. Mr. Donovan hoped Leonard Griffith wouldn't notice her absence, or at least wouldn't question it. After all, people come and go in the corporate world. Why should one assistant manager's sudden departure matter? When Mr. Griffith arrived, Mr. Donovan ushered him into the expansive conference room, offering refreshments and a round of introductions. Several members of the board were present, each eager to impress. Mr. Donovan, beginning the pitch, "Thank you for joining us, Mr. Griffith. We're excited to share our vision for the future of our brand. The first few slides went smoothly. The design team presented sketches for next season's collection, and the production managers discussed cost efficiencies. Then it came time for the marketing portion. The managers assigned to present fumbled through the data, lacking the depth of understanding that Sarah had possessed. Mr. Griffith, interrupting politely, I recall Ms. Morgan had an interesting analysis on social media strategies. I was impressed by her insights regarding micro-influencer campaigns. Is she here today? Mr. Donovan cleared his throat, trying to maintain composure. Mr. Donovan, unfortunately, Ms. Morgan is no longer with the company. We have other capable hands who. Mr. Griffith's expression revealed a mixture of curiosity and unease, but he let Mr. Donovan continue. The rest of the presentation limped on, never fully regaining the momentum it had lost. By the end, Mr. Donovan felt a surge of relief that it was finally over, though it had not gone nearly as well as he'd hoped. Mr. Griffith, well, I appreciate the overview. I'll need some time to think this through and discuss with my advisors. I'll be in touch. With that, Mr. Griffith left, offering polite handshakes but no clear indication of his investment decision. Mr. Donovan could sense that the meeting had fallen short of expectations. Boardroom reactions. When Mr. Donovan returned to the boardroom, the directors, men and women who had staked their reputations on this expansion, turned their scrutinizing gazes on him. Board Member 1, what was that? We were barely able to cover our own projections without Ms. Morgan's notes. Why did she leave so suddenly? Mr. Donovan, curtly, she was no longer a fit. Her departure is no cause for alarm. We have the data we need. Board Member 2, with all due respect, it didn't seem that way. Mr. Griffith's interest was piqued by her specifically, and she wasn't here. Now he's uncertain. That's a potential major investment at stake. The tension in the room was palpable. Mr. Donovan, unused to having his authority questioned, responded in a clipped tone. Mr. Donovan, I made an executive decision. Ms. Morgan was not meeting the company's ongoing needs. No one in the room voiced it, but everyone suspected there was more to the story. Firing someone so capable, so integral to this exact pitch, there had to be a reason. Chapter 11. Behind closed doors. Mr. Donovan's moment of reflection. Late that evening, Mr. Donovan sat alone in his spacious, minimalist office, the city lights twinkling outside. Stacks of papers cluttered his desk, but his thoughts drifted back to that morning's confrontation with Sarah. He remembered the look of betrayal on her face, the trembling in her voice. He reminded himself that this was a business decision. He couldn't risk having an employee go on maternity leave during their busiest times. The brand needed all hands on deck. Plus, from a coldly pragmatic standpoint, he had convinced himself that pregnant employees were more trouble than they were worth. Yet, for the first time in years, a sliver of doubt pricked his conscience. Sarah had been one of the best employees he'd ever had. Even if she needed maternity leave, wouldn't that be a small price to pay for someone of her caliber? He shook off the thought. That kind of emotional reasoning had no place in the cutthroat world of fashion, where everything hinged on speed, image, and constant innovation. Mr. Donovan to himself, it was the right move. She was going to be a liability. He repeated the words as if trying to convince himself. Outside, a plane blinked red in the night sky, carrying travelers to far-off destinations. Inside, Mr. Donovan felt a sense of unease he couldn't quite place. Chapter 12. Turning Point. Sarah's resolve grows in the days that followed. Sarah spent countless hours on the phone with Eric, gathering any potential evidence and working through the legal process. She also started to receive calls and texts from former colleagues. Some offered moral support, shocked by the suddenness of her termination. Others asked her to share her side of the story, as rumors about her firing had spread. She was careful not to disclose too much, but she did speak candidly about the discrimination she faced. It seemed that her story was beginning to ripple through the industry grapevine. An unexpected visit one afternoon, as Sarah was reviewing her finances at her kitchen table, calculating how long her savings would last, there was a knock on her door. She wasn't expecting anyone, so she peered through the peephole cautiously. Her surprise, she saw Lucy, the intern who had helped her pack her things on that dreadful day. Sarah opened the door to find Lucy looking both excited and nervous, clutching a folder in her hands. Lucy, hi Sarah, I hope this isn't a bad time. I got your address from an old contact list. I had to come see you. Concerned but also touched by the gesture, Sarah invited her in. Sarah, of course, come in. Do you want something to drink? Water, tea? Lucy nodding. Water would be great, thanks. They settled at the small table in Sarah's living room, an area adorned with sketches and mood boards from her personal projects. Lucy quietly, first I want to say I'm sorry about everything that happened. It's awful. It's all everyone at work can talk about. Sarah, I appreciate it. It means a lot to have support. It was a shock, to say the least. Lucy leaned forward, her voice lowering conspiratorially. Lucy, look, I found these documents on the shared drive at work. I thought you might need them. She opened the folder, revealing printouts of internal memos and emails that seemed to discuss human resource concerns regarding employees who might go on leave. Sarah skimmed them, her eyebrows arching as she read about official policies that seemed to discourage extended maternity leaves in an almost threatening tone. Sarah, these are disturbing. It's basically an unofficial policy to make pregnant employees feel unwelcome. Lucy, yeah. I'm not supposed to have these, obviously, but after seeing what happened to you, I feel like someone has to speak out. The company is trying to look progressive on the outside, but internally, well, you can see for yourself. Sarah felt a surge of gratitude and renewed determination. This was the kind of evidence Eric had said they might need, documentation that proved a pattern of discrimination rather than a one-off event. Sarah, Lucy, thank you. This could be really important. But I don't want you to get into trouble. Lucy shrugged, a mixture of worry and resolve in her eyes. Lucy, I'm just an intern. They don't pay me enough to stay silent about something so wrong. If they find out, I'll manage. I'm tired of seeing people bullied or marginalized like this. Sarah reached out and squeezed Lucy's hand. Sarah, you're braver than you know, and I'm grateful. Chapter 13. The investor's next move. Griffith pulls back. While Sarah collected evidence for her potential lawsuit, Mr. Donovan received a call from Leonard Griffith's office. To his shock, Mr. Griffith had decided to postpone any further investment discussions. The official statement cited concerns about the company's internal stability and corporate culture. The news sent shockwaves through the executive team. They had counted on Griffith's investment to finance several upcoming ventures, including expansion into Asian and Middle Eastern markets. Now everything was in jeopardy. Boardroom panic. A hastily convened board meeting devolved into bickering and blame shifting. Board member 1 accusingly, if we lose Griffith's funding, where does that leave us? We have outstanding costs for our new ad campaigns, production lines. This is catastrophic. Board member 2 pointing at Mr. Donovan. This all happened right after you fired Ms. Morgan. Did that have something to do with it? Mr. Donovan, face flushing. I had valid reasons for terminating her. It shouldn't affect Griffith's decision. We just need to reassure him we're on solid footing. Board member 3. The fact is Ms. Morgan was a key figure in the marketing department. Griffith specifically requested her input, and now he's pulling out. It doesn't look good. Mr. Donovan glared at the table, seething but unable to refute the logic. He promised to reach out to Mr. Griffith personally to persuade him that the company was still a sound investment. Chapter 14. Seeds of a New Beginning. Sarah considers her options as the possibility of a legal showdown loomed. Sarah found herself staring at her half-finished design sketches pinned on a corkboard in her living room. Despite the chaos, she felt a stirring of creative energy. She recalled the hours and hours she had spent helping the brand refine their collections, the marketing strategies she had developed, the insights she had gleaned from meeting with high-end clients. A seed of an idea began to take root. What if she started her own fashion line? It sounded audacious. She had some savings, but nowhere near enough to launch a fully-fledged label. Yet she had the knowledge, the experience, and a handful of contacts, plus a fierce desire to prove her worth, to show that being pregnant didn't make her weak or a liability. She spent late nights scribbling down ideas, crafting hypothetical budgets, outlining marketing angles. If she could get a small investor, someone who believed in her, maybe she could at least start an online boutique or a capsule collection. A surprising phone call one evening while she was updating her resume in case she needed to apply for jobs. Her phone rang. She glanced at the caller ID, a private number. Sarah, hello, voice. Ms. Morgan, it's Leonard Griffith. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Sarah trying to sound composed. Mr. Griffith, good evening. Mr. Griffith, I'd like to meet again if you have time tomorrow. There's something I'd like to discuss regarding your future in the fashion industry. Sarah's pulse quickened. Sarah, yes, of course, anytime that works for you. Mr. Griffith, let's meet at my office at 5:00 p.m. See you then. He ended the call abruptly, leaving Sarah to wonder what this could mean. She suspected it had something to do with the brand and her firing, but her mind also spun with the fleeting hope that maybe, just maybe, Mr. Griffith saw potential in her beyond her role at her former company. Chapter 15. A New Proposition. Griffith's vision. When Sarah arrived at Mr. Griffith's office the next day, she felt more optimistic than she had in weeks. Anna greeted her warmly, leading her to the same private meeting area as before. Mr. Griffith entered, a file in hand. He offered a cordial nod as he sat down across from Sarah. Mr. Griffith, thank you for coming. I've been doing some thinking about your situation. I also had my team do some discreet research into the circumstances of your termination, and it seems you're not the only woman who's been pushed out due to pregnancy or family obligations at that company. Sarah wasn't surprised to hear that, but it still fueled her indignation. Mr. Griffith, I've delayed my investment with them. Depending on how things unfold, I may withdraw entirely. Now, that leaves a certain amount of capital I had earmarked for fashion ventures. I'd like to see if you might be interested in a different arrangement. Sarah's heart thudded in her chest. Sarah, what kind of arrangement? Mr. Griffith opened the file, revealing a series of documents. Mr. Griffith, I'm willing to consider financing a startup in the fashion sector, specifically a brand that could bring a fresh perspective. I saw firsthand how capable you are, and you've demonstrated a clear sense of fashion marketing and design. Are you interested in starting your own company? For a few moments, Sarah was too stunned to speak. Could this really be happening? Sarah, voice quivering with excitement. I've thought about it, yes, but I assumed it would be years down the line before I could save enough capital. Mr. Griffith, I'm prepared to invest, provided we can formalize a business plan that outlines your vision, product line, target demographics, and scalability. I'd have a minority stake, of course, but the creative control would be yours. Sarah's mind reeled. This was a massive opportunity. She would be able to design her own collections, build her own brand culture, one that embraced diversity and inclusivity, including pregnant women and mothers. She swallowed hard, trying to maintain professionalism. Sarah, Mr. Griffith, I don't even know how to thank you. I need time to put a plan together, but I'd be thrilled to take this chance. Mr. Griffith, excellent. Send me a draft of your business proposal as soon as you can. We'll refine it together, and if all goes well, we can get started soon. They shook hands, and Sarah felt a surge of renewed purpose. As she left his office, the events of the past week, her firing, the despair, the uncertainty, felt like they'd happened in a different lifetime. She still had a long road ahead, but now that road was illuminated by opportunity. Chapter 16, Building the Foundation. Brainstorming and planning. Sarah spent the next few weeks feverishly developing her business plan. Her living room transformed into a makeshift workspace with mood boards, financial spreadsheets, fabric samples, and branding ideas plastered everywhere. She leaned on her network, old friends from college, former coworkers who supported her, and even Lucy, who eagerly contributed fresh ideas from the vantage point of a younger generation. She developed a vision that combined sustainable, high-quality fabrics with accessible luxury. She wanted to create a brand that resonated with modern, conscientious consumers, especially women who wanted elegance without compromising on practicality. A brand name. After hours of scribbling words on paper, Sarah finally decided on a name, Morgan & Co. It felt personal enough to reflect her journey but generic enough to leave room for growth, should she eventually expand. She sketched out initial designs for a capsule collection, versatile pieces that could transition from day to night, incorporate subtle maternity-friendly options without screaming maternity wear, and highlight craftsmanship over fleeting trends. Chapter 17, Partnering with Griffith. The final pitch. After weeks of preparation, Sarah returned to Mr. Griffith's office, this time with a polished presentation. She showed him sample designs, brand identity concepts, and a clear financial breakdown, projected costs, potential revenue, marketing strategies, and timelines. Mr. Griffith and his advisory team asked probing questions about manufacturing, supply chain ethics, potential collaborations, and marketing channels. Sarah answered with the confidence born from years in the industry. In the end, Mr. Griffith nodded approvingly. Mr. Griffith, I think you have something here, something fresh, ethical, and marketable. Let's do this. He reached out, shaking Sarah's hand in a more formal agreement. Chapter 18, From Dream to Reality. Establishing Morgan & Co. The next few months were a whirlwind of activity. Company registration. Eric, who was also well-connected legally, helped Sarah register Morgan & Co. as an official business entity. Finding a workspace. Sarah rented a small studio in a refurbished warehouse district. It wasn't glamorous, but it offered enough room for initial design and production planning. Hearing talent, she brought on a small team, people she trusted, some of whom were ex-colleagues unhappy with the old company's toxic culture. Lucy joined as an official employee after her internship ended, excited to learn all aspects of a startup. Sourcing materials. True to her mission, Sarah chose eco-friendly fabrics and ethical manufacturing partners. She negotiated deals that respected labor rights and maintained high-quality standards. All the while, Sarah's pregnancy progressed. She dealt with morning sickness, fatigue, and regular checkups, but unlike her former boss's dire predictions, she managed just fine. She took breaks when she needed to, delegated responsibilities where necessary, and found that her passion for this new venture fueled her energy. Chapter 19, Rumblings at the Old Company. Financial strains. Without Griffith's significant investment, Mr. Donovan's brand began to feel the crunch. Marketing campaigns were scaled back. They had to delay certain runway shows. The board grew restless, pressuring Mr. Donovan to find alternative funding. But in the high-end fashion world, word spread quickly. Other potential investors seemed wary of stepping in. Legal developments. In parallel, Eric filed a formal complaint on Sarah's behalf with the EEOC. Once the agency opened an investigation, the company found itself entangled in legal headaches. Mr. Donovan tried to bury the matter, but it was harder to conceal than he anticipated. especially with Lucy's leaked documents and testimonies from a few other women who came forward to share similar stories of pregnancy discrimination. Chapter 20, Morgan & Co.'s grand debut. A launch like no other. 3 months after Sarah's firing, 3 tumultuous months of intense planning, designing, and building, Morgan & Co. held a modest launch event. It was nothing like the over-the-top runway shows of her old workplace, but it had warmth, authenticity, and a buzz of excitement that only genuine passion can create. Venue: an industrial chic loft with exposed brick walls and tall windows overlooking the city skyline. Guest list: friends, local influencers, supportive fashion journalists, and potential small-scale investors. Collections on display: mannequins wearing the capsule collection pieces stood on simple platforms. Models walked around casually, allowing guests to see how the clothes moved and fit. Sarah, now visibly pregnant, stood by the entrance greeting attendees. She wore one of her own designs, a versatile dress that flattered her baby bump while still looking runway-ready. Lucy excitedly, "Sarah, we just got word that a well-known fashion blogger is here to cover the event." Sarah smiled, though her heart pounded with both nerves and joy. This was the culmination of her dream, a dream that had been forced into reality by her former boss's cruelty. A surprise arrival midway through the event. As Sarah chatted with a small group of journalists about the design inspirations, she noticed a familiar figure stepping through the door: Leonard Griffith. He moved quietly, observing the displays before joining the group. Mr. Griffith, with a proud smile, "Congratulations, Ms. Morgan, the collection is impressive." Sarah thanked him, her cheeks flushing with gratitude. Sarah smiling, "Thank you for believing in me. This wouldn't have been possible without your support." "Mr. Griffith, you've done the hard work. I just helped open a door." They discussed the line's future, potential expansions, e-commerce strategies, collaborations, and plans for a fuller collection next season. In that moment, Sarah felt a wave of satisfaction and triumph. She thought of Mr. Donovan's words the day he fired her: "Pregnant women are a liability. We need someone stronger." Little did he know, her pregnancy had propelled her towards something greater than she ever imagined. Chapter 21, the old company's collapse. Cracks turn into chasms. While Morgan & Co. enjoyed a promising start, Mr. Donovan's fashion house continued its downward spiral. Without the necessary capital infusion, they struggled to pay for top designers, leading to a drop in design quality. Marketing campaigns fell flat, overshadowed by the swirling rumors of unethical practices. The final blow came when multiple investors pulled out after hearing about the EEOC investigations. The brand's stock plummeted, and within weeks, it was clear they would have to file for bankruptcy if they couldn't find a white knight investor. Boardroom desperation: the once gilded boardroom turned into a war zone of accusations. Some board members blamed Mr. Donovan's leadership style. Others cited the brand's unwillingness to adapt and modernize its workplace policies. Behind closed doors, Mr. Donovan watched as everything he'd built disintegrated. He maintained a stoic facade, but inside, he felt the crushing weight of failure. Chapter 22, Donovan at a crossroads. Seeking employment. Faced with his company's bankruptcy, Mr. Donovan had no choice but to seek employment elsewhere. Yet his reputation in the fashion world was tarnished by rumors of discrimination and harsh management. To make matters worse, the industry was abuzz with admiration for Sarah Morgan. Her story of resilience resonated with many, and Morgan & Co. was gaining traction. Mr. Donovan's phone calls to old contacts largely went unanswered or ended with polite refusals to meet. He realized, with growing dread, that he might have to apply for positions far below his previous stature. Chapter 23, the resumed submission. A moment of irony and a twist of fate that seemed almost scripted. Mr. Donovan found himself submitting resumes online, scrolling through job postings in the fashion and retail sector. He saw an opening for a brand development manager at a promising new label that emphasized ethical work culture, innovative designs, and rapid growth. Without thinking, he uploaded his resume. Only after clicking submit did he notice the label's name in the fine print: Morgan & Co. Mr. Donovan, muttering, "Morgan & Co., that's Sarah Morgan's brand." He stared at his screen, stunned. He had heard about her success, but he never expected to be in a position where he might actually end up working for her. Part of him considered immediately withdrawing the application. Another part, desperate for employment, hesitated. Chapter 24, the interview. Sarah's reaction. A week later, Lucy approached Sarah in their small but bustling office. She held a file labeled managerial candidates. Lucy, incredulous, "You won't believe who just applied." She handed Sarah the resume. Sarah's eyes widened in disbelief when she saw the name, Alexander Donovan. Sarah slowly, "He's applying here, after everything." Emotions swirled in her chest: shock, anger, a hint of satisfaction, but also pity. The man who had once crushed her dreams now came seeking a position at her new venture. "Lucy, should we just discard it, or?" Sarah paused, recalling how it felt to be let go so abruptly. Part of her wanted to toss his resume in the trash, yet she also believed that her brand represented fairness, even to those who hadn't shown it to her. Sarah calmly, schedule an interview. Lucy's eyes widened, but she nodded. The interview day. On the day of the interview, Mr. Donovan walked into the Morgan & Co. office with trepidation. It was smaller than the luxurious space he once commanded, but it was filled with a vibrant, creative energy that even he couldn't deny. He was led to a conference room where he waited, fidgeting with his tie. When Sarah finally walked in, he stood, awkwardly clearing his throat. Mr. Donovan, Sarah, Ms. Morgan. It's been a while, Sarah. It has. Please have a seat. She took the interviewer's seat across from him, crossing her legs as she picked up his resume. The silence stretched, tense and heavy. Mr. Donovan avoided her gaze, focusing instead on a spot on the table. Mr. Donovan, I want to apologize for what happened before. The way I handled your pregnancy, it was unprofessional and unfair. Sarah listened, her face impassive. Mr. Donovan, continuing, I've learned a lot in recent months. I realize how wrong I was. Now I'm just looking for an opportunity to contribute somewhere, to start again. The tables turned. She studied him for a long moment before speaking. Sarah, Mr. Donovan, you fired me because I was pregnant. You told me pregnant women are a liability. I lost my income, my sense of security, everything I'd built up to that point. He nodded, visibly uncomfortable. Mr. Donovan, I know, and that decision cost me everything too in the end. I'm not asking for forgiveness, but he trailed off. Sarah inhaled, recalling the pain, the anger, but also how that same injustice pushed her to launch Morgan & Co., which was now thriving. Sarah, this is a brand that values ethical leadership and respects its employees' personal lives. Are you prepared to embrace those values? His nod came quickly. Mr. Donovan, yes, absolutely. I'm prepared to do whatever it takes. Sarah set his resume aside and fixed him with a steady gaze. Then she said the words she had dreamed of saying since that fateful day. Sarah, I'm sorry, Mr. Donovan, we need someone stronger. The echo of his own words hung in the air, cutting through the tension like a knife. Mr. Donovan's face fell and he seemed to shrink in his seat. Mr. Donovan, I understand. Without another word, he stood to leave, his eyes downcast. Sarah felt an unexpected pang of empathy. But she also knew this moment was a form of justice, a closure for the pain he had caused. Chapter 25, Aftermath and Reflection. Vindication. Following Mr. Donovan's departure, Sarah felt a strange mixture of triumph and sadness. It was satisfying to see him brought low by the same callousness that once heaped misery upon her, yet she took no real pleasure in his suffering. She was too focused on the health of her business and her unborn child to dwell on vengeance. Legal resolution. Eric called her a week later with good news. The company had agreed to a substantial settlement in her discrimination case. They wanted to avoid an expensive trial and more negative publicity. Sarah's victory was a matter of public record, reinforcing her message that pregnant women were not liabilities. Morgan & Co. expansion. With the settlement money and the growing success of her capsule collection, Sarah was able to move Morgan & Co. to a larger studio. She even set up a small showroom for clients and media. The brand's name continued to spread, attracting collaborations and partnerships with influencers who admired Sarah's story. Lucy, no longer an intern, now managed social media and marketing strategy, inspired by the mentorship she received from Sarah. Other employees, many of them women who had faced their own workplace struggles, found a supportive environment where their ideas were welcomed. Epilogue. The future looks bright at last. The day came when Sarah was ready to give birth. She stepped away from the office, leaving Lucy and the others in charge during her maternity leave. Though it was a busy season, Morgan & Co. adapted smoothly, proof that a well-structured, respectful work environment could accommodate life's changes. When Sarah cradled her newborn daughter, Grace, for the first time, tears of joy streamed down her face. She whispered words of love and reassurance, promising that she would always fight for a world where motherhood was never a weakness, where every woman's potential could flourish without fear of discrimination. In the end, Sarah had lost her old job but gained a new purpose, and in doing so, found a strength that Mr. Donovan could never have foreseen. For anyone reading Sarah's story, the final question remains: would you have hired Mr. Donovan to give him a second chance, or let him face the consequences of his own actions? Share your thoughts and stand up for what's right. And remember to subscribe, because stories like these remind us that every challenge can become the seed of a new opportunity, so long as we dare to believe in our own strength.